had a similar conversation when my own father died. He died over 23 years ago. Long before he got sick and died, but not like so far away. He came into the living room. I was at home in Ireland, and he came in and he asked me, he wanted to talk to me about his will, about after his death. And I did not want at that time to talk about his will or after his death because I couldn't bear the thought of him being dead at all. So we didn't have the conversation. I was like, not having the conversation. Anyway, time passed. We did have some conversations in writing, but they're never the same because a lot gets lost in translation. So Daddy died. And then it was after his death, I did a piece of reflection for my work. I was doing some training at work for my job as a nurse. And I did some reflection on the differences, the things I would have done so differently had I had the opportunity again. And it was because actually of my own father's death that I now advocate that everyone should have the conversations. They are very difficult. People don't like to have them because they can't bear the thought of losing a loved one at all. But the opposite side of that coin is when they die, like Judith just said, she feels guilt after all this time because she didn't know what to do. Lots of people feel guilt because they don't know what to do and because we don't have those conversations.
So how is that a topic that can be broached?
Can I just come in a minute? I was perhaps lucky my experience with my wife, because we sat down with Sue and we planned her final days. We planned what her choice would be, how she would like to die. She knew it was inevitable, and there is a little form, isn't there, that you can use, and that helps you to plan the end of life. And I think that is very important. I know we don't like to talk about it, but my wife insisted, and she was the one. She even planned which hymns she would have at her funeral. So it is important. The person who's left behind has the problems, but it's not for us. It's for the person who is passing that we've got to help.
I think the booklet Arthur's referring to is Advanced Care Planning booklet, and these are available from the hospice, also from Cruse. Cruse put together a really, really good folder, really, which has got things about planning for dying, things that you need to do for your finances, but also things you might want to do for yourself. And we can then follow that up. What we have since Judith's father died, Rosie and I were both working separately at the same time and found out about each other to try and produce a policy for community for do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation. There was already a hospital policy, but it didn't transfer to community. So we then got together and with Steve Crow, who's a paramedic, and the resuscitation officer, and our governance lady, Jenny Brown, and we began to form this policy. Later on, we then invited Judith to join us because she'd been through the experience, so we thought it'd be really, really good to have her thoughts on it. And then Stephen Herron joined us latterly as well. So this do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation has been around now since July 2016, and we updated it last June, and we're hoping before the next update in 2020 to make it a unified policy, so it will go across the hospitals, the hospice and us in community, and that means the patient will then have the same form wherever they are and will not have to be asked that question over and over again, because it's good to have the conversation, but we don't need to keep repeating the conversation, which we do have to do still at the moment. So,
to put that in sort of layman's terms, if you like, you are effectively opting not to be resuscitated if that's a situation that arises. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, that's you can make that decision yourself, but overall, it's actually a medical decision. We look at cardiopulmonary resuscitation as a treatment, the same as any other treatment, and actually, if you're very frail, if you're not going to recover from resuscitation, because unfortunately we all watch the dramas on the television, and in Holby City and Casualty, to name but two, everyone has one shock and they sit up again, and it's marvellous, they're back to tax-paying status, which rarely happens if someone is already debilitated and resuscitation is attempted, the chances are they're not going to recover, or they may recover for a couple of days, end up spending the last few hours in a coronary care or intensive care unit, which perhaps was not their wishes. So we now do have this form. We've produced a leaflet called Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation, which explains what happens when you're resuscitated and why it's good to make that decision not to be resuscitated. What we do in community, because it was difficult to, where do we record this, where do we keep this form, we had all sorts of ideas about pinning it above the headboard of the bed, but what happens if you're sleeping in a different room and there's a stranger in your bed? So we came up with using the Lions Club bottles, which have been around for some years, the message in a bottle. And in there's a couple of green crosses that you stick on your fridge. You put this in the fridge with your Do Not Resuscitate form inside it, and you stick a cross on the inside of the door that you use all the time. So if the paramedics come to your house and they see that green cross, it will alert them, there's something here we need to investigate. Is it a Do Not Resuscitate form, or is there some other important message in the fridge? Is that right, Stephen? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to touch on a couple of things just to bring back a little bit. When we talk about dying, it's one of those things that we have to, unfortunately, just face up to the fact that dying is a part of life, really. I think most of us are very, very good at putting plans for life in place. You know, we're all planned to get a mortgage, we plan to have a family, we plan to get married, but we very rarely plan what happens at the point of dying. And it's really, really important that we consider that death is a part of life, so it's important to plan for that. The idea of the DNACPR form is it's very, very specific to CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which is the act that it's the treatment that we provide when someone goes into cardiac arrest. And as Sue said, there's certain conditions, certain illnesses that people can suffer from, which people can't recover from. They won't return from if we try and do CPR for someone. CPR is extremely effective as a treatment for people who are generally fit and healthy. If they have a sudden cardiac arrest, it can be extremely successful in many cases. However, for debilitating ongoing illnesses, sometimes it isn't beneficial, and CPR itself can be quite brutal, can be quite damaging to the body, really. And for that to be a lasting memory for a family, to see their loved one go through that is quite traumatic sometimes. So the DNACPR, the whole policy, the idea of that is to try and ease that pressure and to open up the idea of having discussion with the family, with the patient, and for this decision to be put in place. And it helps us from a paramedic point of view to be able to arrive on scene at a cardiac arrest and very quickly be able to make a decision that would be beneficial to the patient and their family.